Welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and today we are talking about snakes and magic. Let's get into it. So, if you are new here, I am Joshua Pearsall, and we are resuming our series going through some essays in the NIV Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. It's important you get the Archaeological Study Bible if you want to get this exact Bible. It's out of print. The Archaeology one is not this one. This series is all about looking at and examining the theology of the Old Testament and then comparing it to the neighbors around them. This is sort of inspired by the idea of John Oswalt. As I say most weeks, his book's right there in my closet, and I just keep not getting it. Showing how the theology is so unique and different that it can't have just been a development of thought compared to their neighbors. It had to be something unique. There is no other explanation. Somehow there is a different source for the theology of the Hebrews and later the Israelites that is different than their pagan neighbors. And today's essay on venomous serpents is one of these examples. And it touches on several things we've talked about. And in fact, if you thought this might be the Exodus, I wouldn't blame you. This essay is actually in Numbers. We've talked about the serpent in Genesis as well. We talked about the miracles between Moses and then the magicians of the Pharaoh as he battled them already on this. I believe we've already talked about that. If not, we will at some point. But this is actually talking about Ugaritic liturgy against venomous snakes. And Numbers 21. This is the journey to Moab. I'm sure the story will become very familiar very quickly for anyone familiar with it. If not, feel free to go and read it. It won't matter too much for this, but the passage, if anyone's interested, is specifically centered around Numbers 21, 6 through 9. So, Numbers 21. Poisonous snakes pose a serious and ever-present threat to people in the ancient world. 3 texts from Ugarit, all of which address this problem, suggest that the typical pagan solution was to search for a magic formula to counter the results of the venom. One of these texts is but a fragment, another a mythical narrative, and the third a magical incantation. In the myth, second text, 12 different deities are asked for a cure for snakebite. 11 responded with an ability to charm the serpent, but only one, Huranu, successfully neutralizes the venom. He counteracts the poison by casting trees into the Tigris River, ritually enacting the manner by which he will weaken the venom, as if diluting it in water. And just an aside there, for anyone who is a pagan and worships these types of deities, and really for everyone else, how weak are these deities if they cannot cure snake venom, and have 11 of them fail to cure the snake venom, when in Paul's case, he gets bitten by a venomous snake and he's able to just throw it off as if it was nothing. Anyway, the third text, written for the benefit of a high official, is an incantation employing a ritual similar to Huranu's to protect both against serpents and the sorcerers who used them. That's its own interesting history right there. We're not going to have time for that for this video. The Israelites, like the inhabitants of Ugarit, feared the lethal snakes so abundant both in the wilderness and in the land of Canaan. God's snake-related punishment recorded in Numbers 21, 6 through 9 demonstrated that only the Lord has ultimate power over serpents, and indeed over all evil. Not only did he send venomous snakes to punish the Israelites because of their ingratitude, but he also provided the means of a cure, i.e. the bronze snake, when his people repented and sought his mercy, and the same broad serpent that later became an idol for the people that had to be destroyed. It is noteworthy that although the Israelites were required to gaze up at the bronze serpent in order to receive restoration, the biblical text mentions no magical ritual or incantation. To learn more about the role of the snake in the ancient Near East, see the serpent motif in other ancient Near Eastern literature on page 8. I believe that is going to be the first video on our The Bible is History, Not Myth playlist on the channel, which pops up near the end of these videos in the little cards. And I think is linked in the doobly-doo below as well, if anyone's interested in checking out that video. Important, some similarities, but talks about a lot of other different important points. Here, definitely worth highlighting. I mean, as they said it, they kind of pointed out one of the important parts, right? This isn't a magical incantation. We've talked in this series how magic worked in the ancient world for these people, and for them there was no separation of magic and I want to say liturgy, but like religious, right? There's no separating these things. If a priest is making an incantation as a religious rite, and it happens to be a spell, well, it's not two different things. It's the same thing. That's how magic worked for them in their minds. Whereas in the Old Testament, right, there's a clear divide between the divine and then these other supernatural magics whose source is not the Lord. And anything that comes from the Lord is strictly separated from magic, right? Even here with the bronze serpent, it's clear in the story. They are to gaze upon the serpent to be healed, but it's not the serpent or a ritual that's healing them. It is the Lord himself that does the healing, and that's just a means he has ordained. And that's a really big, stark difference. We'll set that right there. Between the Hebrews and later the Israelites and their neighbors, is that they're not supposed to be relying on these magic rituals and incantations, these performances and things they do for these false deities, these demons, these pagan idols. Of course, Israel, throughout their history, fall into this trap. They partake in divination, necromancy, these types of things, sacrifices that were condemned in the Old Testament, and really fall off their way. But taking them as the commands that they were supposed to be following, there is such a big difference there. And a lot of times, too, it's not conditioned on appeasing the Lord with some sacrifice. It's not conditioned on completing a certain task, right? These types of things you hear in like Greek mythology or reading various rites and incantations and stuff from these ancient people where they go through these very elaborate things at times. Sometimes it's not that elaborate, but other times it's extremely intricate and elaborate, including even taking one person's life as part of the ritual. And with the Lord, he's like, look at the bronze serpent. Pretty easy. With Gideon, he puts a test to the Lord, make the fleece damp, make the fleece dry. Like, the comparison there is pretty simple. And the results are always markedly the Lord and nothing else. When Moses is parting the water, when he's leading the people, yes, at times it is clearly said Moses is doing things because he is physically actually doing these things. But the agent, the root, the cause, and the one attributed with the success and efficiency of it all is the Lord himself. He's the one who led the people through the desert and successfully got them through the wilderness after the generation of those with stiff necks were all had passed away except for Joshua and Caleb. He is the one who led them by a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. He is the one who provided water from the rock. He is the one who rained down manna from heaven. These continuing things. One of my favorite phrases I've kind of picked up on throughout the Old Testament is when it describes the passing through the Red Sea, is specifically they went through the depths. That's sort of this language for the deep, the realm of death, of chaos, of the demons. That's its own video with its whole thing. That's going to be something interesting to delve into at some point. But the Lord is the one who takes them through the depths. He's the one who, as Psalm 23 tells us, takes us through the valley of the shadow of death. Because we must pass through the valley. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So, not going to hit on a lot of differences here, but one very important one, that for a lot of Christians, we sort of just take that for granted. And for a lot of people who are skeptical of Christianity, you might just be like, oh, well, yeah, obviously. But try and get into the mindset of these people who are hearing this for the first time, who are being told, no, you're not performing magic rituals. You are not using divination. You're not using necromancy. This ritual you want to do will do nothing for you because I will not act through it. Here's what I'm going to do, and it's me, not magic, not anything else doing it. That's radical. That's so different to how they think of the world works. It'd be like if we had only had atheist and science and no faith. To anyone who says science and faith are in opposition, you're wrong. But let's pretend like we never knew about supernatural. Somehow we're in this weird world that does. And then suddenly a miracle happens. That would be like seeing a miracle for the first time. And I mean, in a way, many of us can relate to that if you ever get to see a miracle or experience a miracle in any way. It's its own amazing experience. But imagine doing that in a world where you thought that could never, ever happen. Not just that there's no reports of it, not that you're just skeptical that it could never happen, that it is as far as you were completely aware, impossible and never reported beforehand. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with here. Think like that. That's how explosive, how different, how radical this idea would be. And I think that is a good spot to end this. I should be back from England, so we'll go back to slower recording. So you won't have to worry about so many of my videos popping up in your feed. But I'm sure it was a good trip. I'm sure I'll have a video coming out on it at some point. And look for that. That'll be fun. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.